My husband insisted I sell my inheritance to cover his debts. Instead, I used the money to buy his struggling business. As I took over, I was thrust into a new world of challenges, all while dealing with the growing tension between us. The dynamic of our marriage shifted, and I had to figure out how to keep the business afloat while navigating the consequences of my decision. With every step I took to secure the future of the company, I realized how much I was changing, becoming someone stronger, more independent, and less willing to sacrifice my own needs. Before we dive back in, let us know where you're tuning in from. If this story resonates with you, don't forget to hit that subscribe button because tomorrow, I've got something even more special lined up just for you. I stood there in shock, my heart hammering in my chest, unable to fully process what my husband had just said. Sell your inheritance. We need the money. The words echoed in my mind, each one stabbing at me like a dagger. It wasn't just the request, it was the tone, the finality in his voice. The quiet desperation that had settled in his eyes had quickly turned into a cold demand. My blood ran cold as the truth hit me harder than I could ever have imagined. The man I had spent years building my life with had just asked me to sacrifice everything for him. This wasn't a minor request. It wasn't about the extra spending or a brief hardship. This was about my inheritance, a sum of money I had received from my late father. It was meant to be a safety net, a foundation, something to fall back on in the event of a crisis. It had been part of my life for years, something I had always thought of as mine, something that could never be touched by anyone else, no matter what. But there it was. My husband, the man I thought I knew inside and out, standing before me with those words. We need it. I can't manage the business without it. Please, just sell it. I didn't know how to react. A numbness spread through me, followed by an overwhelming wave of disbelief. This wasn't what we had agreed upon when we decided to share our lives. We had built this partnership on trust, on mutual respect. He had always claimed he would never ask me for anything I couldn't give, but here he was, asking for everything. Everything. I tried to speak, but the words caught in my throat. A million thoughts raced through my mind, thoughts of my father's legacy, the sacrifices my family had made to build that inheritance, and the unspoken promises that had always existed between me and my husband. He was asking me to give it all away for him. But why now? Why this? The silence between us stretched on, unbearable. He didn't even seem to understand the gravity of his request. All I could hear was the soft hum of the air conditioner in the background, the ticking of the clock on the wall. I'll do it for us, for our future, he said, his voice softer now, as if trying to reassure me, but his words only deepened the sting. This wasn't about a future, it was about his failure. It was about the business he had run into the ground, the debts he had accumulated. I was being asked to clean up his mess, to erase the safety net that had been my family's for generations. But the deeper question loomed in my mind. Was he the same man I had fallen in love with? The man who had promised to cherish me, to honor me, to share our lives equally? Or had he been a stranger all along, hiding his true nature behind the veil of our shared life? I looked at him then, seeing him for the first time as he truly was. Desperate, frail and self-centered. The man who once made me feel like I could conquer the world was now demanding everything from me. I couldn't speak for a long moment. The weight of the decision crushed me. Everything inside me screamed that this wasn't right, that I shouldn't have to choose between my inheritance and my marriage. But I knew what I had to do. I had to protect myself, my legacy, and my future. Why can't you figure this out on your own? The words slipped from my lips before I could stop them. They were harsh, but I couldn't help it. Anger was rising within me, anger at him for making me feel so small, so unimportant in this equation. I wasn't just his wife. I was a person with my own life, my own dreams, and my own legacy. He took a step back, his face a mixture of guilt and frustration. I can't do it without you. Please, just sell the inheritance. We'll be okay. The desperation in his voice only fueled my anger. I had always been the one to hold us together, the one who had carried us through difficult times. But this was different. This was a betrayal. I had never imagined that I would find myself here, in this position. My father's gift had always been a symbol of security. I had never thought it could be taken away from me. But here I was, staring at the man I had shared my life with, and feeling the overwhelming weight of his betrayal. I couldn't let it happen. I couldn't let him take what was mine. So, I walked away. I walked out of the room, leaving him behind, leaving the argument unresolved. My hands were shaking, my mind was reeling, but I knew one thing. I would not let him control my future. Not this way. As I closed the door behind me, I felt a strange clarity. Something deep inside me stirred, an emotion I hadn't felt in a long time, defiance. I would take control of this. And that would be the first step in what would become my journey. The journey of taking back my power. The days that followed were a blur of conflicting emotions. I had thought that stepping away from that heated conversation would give me the clarity I needed, but instead, it had only made the uncertainty inside me grow. My mind kept circling back to that one question. How had we gotten here? How had the man I once trusted so deeply turned into someone who seemed so distant, so different from the person I thought I knew? Our life together hadn't always been perfect, but it had been built on a foundation of love, trust, and mutual sacrifice. We had met in our early 20s, both fresh out of college, eager to conquer the world. I had just started my first job in marketing, and he had already inherited his father's small but promising business. It had been a whirlwind romance, late nights talking about our dreams, shared hopes of building something together, a future where we would both succeed. I had always admired his ambition. He was charming, driven, and full of ideas. He made me believe that anything was possible. Over time, as we settled into our relationship, I had supported him through the ups and downs of business ownership. I became his sounding board, his confidant, his partner in every sense of the word. Together, we weathered the early struggles, the months of tight budgets, the sleepless nights spent figuring out ways to keep the business afloat. At the time, it felt like the kind of struggle that would only make us stronger. But somewhere along the way, things had changed. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the man I had married had become less focused on the future and more focused on maintaining an image, on pretending everything was okay when it wasn't. He had stopped involving me in decisions about the business, stopped discussing the financials with me, and eventually, stopped even acknowledging the problems that were beginning to pile up. I had noticed the signs: missed payments, mounting debts, employees leaving, and suppliers threatening to cut ties. But he always had an excuse. "It's just temporary," he would say. "We'll turn things around soon." But soon never came. And now, here I was, being asked to give up the one thing I had left for myself. My inheritance wasn't just a sum of money, it was a piece of my past, a symbol of my father's hard work and love. It represented stability, something I had desperately clung to when everything around me had seemed uncertain. It was the one thing I had that wasn't tied to my husband's ambitions or failures. And now he wanted to take it from me. I felt like I was standing at a precipice, torn between my loyalty to him and my sense of self-preservation. I could already feel the shift in our relationship, the widening chasm between us. It wasn't just about the inheritance anymore, it was about trust, about how much I was willing to give up, how much I was willing to sacrifice for a marriage that was starting to feel like a house of cards, teetering on the edge of collapse. As I lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, my mind wandered back to the early days of our relationship, to the way we used to dream together. We had always talked about building something that was ours, a legacy. It was supposed to be a shared dream, but somewhere along the way, that dream had become his. And in asking me to sell my inheritance, he was asking me to become part of his vision, his mess. He wanted me to give up my own future, my own plans, to bail him out of his mistakes. The thought made my blood boil. I couldn't do it. But the question that kept gnawing at me was, what now? What was I supposed to do next? How was I supposed to stand up to him without tearing our entire life apart? I hadn't fully realized how deep the rot had gone until I found the letters. It was a small detail, something I had never thought to check before, a series of unopened bills that had been hidden in his desk drawer. At first, I thought it was just another sign of his neglect, of his tendency to bury his head in the sand when things got tough. But as I sifted through the papers, a horrible realization dawned on me. The debts were far worse than I had imagined. Not only was the business on the brink of collapse, but there were also personal debts, large ones, that he had never mentioned. He had been borrowing money from friends, from family, from anyone he could convince to lend him some cash, all to prop up his failing business. There were even legal notices, threats of lawsuits from vendors who hadn't been paid in months. My stomach turned as I pieced it all together. The realization hit me like a ton of bricks. He had been hiding this from me for months, maybe even longer. All those late nights he claimed were spent working, all the times he told me everything was fine. He had been lying. Lying to me, lying to himself, and lying to everyone around him. My heart sank, and I felt a cold anger rise in me. I had trusted him with everything. My love, my time, my future. But he had used that trust to bury himself in a pit of lies. He had betrayed me in the worst way possible. The thought that had been nagging me for days now solidified in my mind. This was no longer just about the money. This was about control. I couldn't stand by and let him destroy everything we had worked for. More importantly, I couldn't let him destroy me. That night, as I sat in the quiet of our bedroom, I made a decision. I wouldn't sell my inheritance. I wouldn't hand over everything I had left just to save his failing business. It was time for me to take control. I had to find a way out of the lies, out of the mess, and, most importantly, out of this toxic relationship. I didn't know how yet, but I knew one thing for sure. The next step was going to be mine. The weeks following my discovery were the hardest of my life. Every day felt like I was living in a fog, caught between a desire to fix everything and the realization that there was nothing left to save. Every time I saw my husband, I saw a man who was both familiar and foreign. His desperation was evident, but there was a coldness in his eyes now, a distance that made my stomach churn. The man who had once shared all his hopes and dreams with me now seemed like a stranger who was only interested in what I could give him. And what he wanted, what he demanded, was the one thing I had left that wasn't tethered to his failures: my inheritance. I tried to talk to him. I tried to have an open conversation, to lay it all out on the table. But every time he deflected. He wouldn't listen, wouldn't acknowledge the severity of the situation. It was always the same. "We'll fix it together," he'd say. But what he meant was, "You'll fix it for me." I could no longer ignore the painful truth. This wasn't about teamwork or partnership. It was about him using me as his financial safety net. The idea of him turning to me for the last of my resources while still refusing to confront his own mistakes made my blood boil. I had always been the one who held us together, the one who made sure everything was in order, whether it was finances, the household, or just the emotional labor of keeping us both afloat. But now, with every lie, every omission, I felt like I was suffocating under the weight of his expectations. One night, I decided to confront him. The anger had reached a boiling point, and I couldn't keep pretending anymore. He was sitting at the kitchen table, his eyes tired but distant, papers strewn out in front of him. He hadn't even looked up when I walked in. "I can't do this anymore," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "I can't keep pretending like everything is fine. You've lied to me. You've hidden everything from me. And now you want me to give up the one thing I have left. I won't do it. I won't sell my inheritance." The words hung in the air between us, and for a long moment, neither of us spoke. He didn't look surprised. Instead, his expression hardened, like he had expected this. "You're being unreasonable," he said, his voice laced with frustration. "You don't understand. The business is failing, and I'm running out of options. I need you to trust me." "I've trusted you," I shot back, my voice breaking despite my best effort to stay calm. "4 years, I've trusted you. But now I see what's really going on. You've been hiding this from me for months, maybe longer. You've been lying to me, and now you want me to sacrifice everything for you. No more." His face darkened, and for a brief moment, I thought I saw a flicker of regret in his eyes. But it was quickly replaced by anger. You don't get it, do you? This isn't just about you and me anymore. It's about saving everything we've built. About keeping the business alive. Without this money, it's all over. I wanted to scream at him, to tell him how selfish and blind he was being. But I knew it wouldn't change anything. I had to make a decision, not just for my own future, but for my own sanity. I had spent so many years supporting him, trusting him, believing in him. But now I saw the truth. The truth was that I had been living in his shadow, waiting for him to fix things, and it had come at the cost of my own life, my own dreams. I'm not your backup plan anymore, I said, my voice firmer now, stronger. I have my own life, my own future, and I won't let you drag me down with you. The silence that followed was suffocating. For the first time in years, there was no comforting silence between us, no unspoken understanding. Just cold, unbearable silence. I walked away that night, my heart heavy with a mix of emotions. Anger, sadness, and something else I hadn't expected, relief. For the first time, I felt like I was taking control of my own life. For so long, I had been living in his world, his mess, his mistakes. But I wasn't willing to let it define me anymore. The next few days were filled with tension, but I knew I couldn't go back. I couldn't give in to him again. There was no going back to the way things were. It had become clear to me that I would have to take control of the situation. I couldn't rely on him, and I certainly couldn't trust him with the future anymore. That's when I started thinking about what I could do, how I could protect myself, my inheritance, and my future. I had to stop waiting for him to fix things. It was up to me now. I spent hours in the quiet of our home, going over everything. His debts, the business, the legal aspects, and my inheritance. I started looking into my options, researching ways I could use my inheritance to secure my own future, independent of him. Then one day, the answer came to me, as though it had been waiting for me all along. I could buy his business. The thought hit me like a spark, lighting up something inside me I hadn't even realized was there. If I took the money from my inheritance and bought his failing business, I could both save it and take control of my future. I had the knowledge and the resources to make it work. It was bold, risky, and completely unexpected. But in that moment, I knew it was my only option. I wouldn't just watch him destroy everything we had built. I would take the reins and turn the business around, on my terms. And in doing so, I would reclaim my life, my power, and my future. It wasn't just about money anymore. It was about taking back what was mine. I spent the next few days immersed in the idea that had taken root in my mind. Buying my husband's business, using the inheritance that had been mine all along to take control of everything he had built, seemed like the most drastic, and yet, the most liberating decision I could make. I knew it wasn't going to be easy. The business was in dire straits, and even if I somehow managed to purchase it, turning it around would be a monumental challenge. But as I sat there, going through the numbers, analyzing everything from debts to assets, I realized that it was the only way forward. My inheritance had always been a part of my future, something I had set aside for security. It had never been meant to be used for someone else's mistakes. But now, in this strange twist of fate, it seemed like the only way I could take back control of my own life. I wasn't just going to be a passive observer anymore. I wasn't going to let him destroy everything I had worked for. I began taking action, quietly, carefully. I consulted with my lawyer, who had been my father's close friend. Together, we worked through the legal steps, preparing the necessary paperwork, assessing the potential risks, and laying out the groundwork for what would come next. There were so many things to consider. Buying a failing business was a huge financial commitment, and the risks were enormous. But there was a part of me that felt almost invigorated by the challenge. I wasn't just a woman who had inherited money. I was about to be the one in control. The idea filled me with a quiet but growing strength. Every step I took alone. I couldn't let my husband know what I was planning. Not yet. He had already shown me what he was capable of, and I knew that if he knew my intentions, he would fight me every step of the way. This wasn't a fight I was willing to lose. The more I researched, the more I realized how much I was capable of. I had worked alongside him, helped run the business in the early years, even when it was struggling. I knew it inside out, better than he did at this point. The business wasn't a complete loss yet. There were assets to salvage, clients who could be brought back, and employees who still believed in what we had built. But most importantly, I had learned that in order to take control, I had to stop being afraid of my own power. The quiet meetings with my lawyer and financial advisors were like a secret world, one that existed outside of my marriage, outside of the life I had built with my husband. It was an empowering, almost secretive space where I was the decision maker. I wasn't just reacting to my husband's demands anymore. I was making my own choices. The decision to buy the business wasn't one I had taken lightly. The process was long and complicated, and at every step, there was the question of whether or not I was making the right choice. I knew that purchasing the business meant taking on a lot of risk. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that I couldn't just sit back and let everything crumble around me. It was my future too, and I had worked too hard to let someone else destroy it. I had to make sure everything was in place before I could approach him. I didn't want to give him any chance to talk me out of it, to make me feel guilty for not helping him the way he wanted. I couldn't trust him with this decision. But I also knew that when I made my move, it would change everything between us. One evening, I gathered all the papers I had worked so tirelessly on. The business plan, the loan documents, the projections for the next few years. All of it. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the pages spread out before me. My heart raced. This was it. I wasn't just going to stand by and watch him destroy everything. I was going to take control of my own destiny. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. There was no turning back now. The next day, I called him into the living room. He walked in, a tired expression on his face, as though he had been expecting another confrontation. He had no idea what I was about to do. "I've made a decision," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm not going to sell my inheritance." He frowned, confusion clouding his features. "What are you talking about? We don't have time for this. If we don't fix the business, we're going to lose everything." "You're right," I said, meeting his gaze. "But I've decided to buy it." His expression shifted, first to confusion, then to disbelief. "What do you mean, buy it? You can't be serious." "I'm serious. I'm using my inheritance to buy the business from you." I said it calmly, as if this was a perfectly normal decision, though inside, my pulse was pounding. "It's mine now." For a moment, he just stared at me, blinking in shock. He took a step back, his hands resting on the back of the couch as if he needed something to hold on to. "You're crazy. You can't just." "I can," I interrupted. "I've already made the arrangements. I've worked with a lawyer, and it's happening. I'm buying the business from you, and I'm taking over. This is how it's going to be." The words hit him like a ton of bricks, and for the first time, I saw the full depth of his panic. It wasn't just about the business anymore. It was about control. He hadn't expected this. I could see it in his eyes, the dawning realization that I wasn't just going to fold, that I wasn't going to give him what he wanted anymore. I wasn't the same person who had followed him blindly. "You can't do this," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, desperation creeping in. "You'll ruin everything. You'll lose everything." "Maybe," I said, meeting his gaze without flinching. "But it's mine to lose." There was a long silence between us, as if we were both waiting for the other to make the first move. But there was no turning back for me now. This was my choice. This was my future. And I wasn't going to let him take it from me. The next few weeks felt like a whirlwind. My decision to buy the business had left my husband reeling, and the tension between us was palpable. He had never imagined that I would do something like this. 4 years, I had stood by him, supported him through every financial crisis, every failed venture. He had expected me to be his safety net again, to sell my inheritance and help him one more time. But I wasn't that woman anymore. I had made my choice, and now I was following through. The process of purchasing the business wasn't easy. There were countless meetings with accountants, lawyers, and financial advisors as I navigated the complexities of taking ownership. Every document I signed, every decision I made, felt like an act of reclaiming my own life. The weight of it was overwhelming at times, but it was also exhilarating. I wasn't just taking control of a failing business, I was taking control of my future, my independence, and my destiny. My husband fought me every step of the way. He tried to convince me that I was making a mistake, that I was destroying our marriage, that I was being selfish. But the more he fought, the more resolute I became. I had seen what had happened when I tried to help him in the past. I had watched him dig himself deeper and deeper into a hole, expecting me to be the one to pull him out. This time, I wouldn't be the one left holding the bag. I couldn't afford to be. There were moments when the guilt crept in. I had spent so much of my life helping him, supporting him, even when it meant sacrificing my own dreams. But this time was different. This time, I had a right to claim something for myself. This wasn't just about business or money. It was about my self-worth. It was about not letting his failures define me any longer. One day, as I was sitting in the business's conference room, surrounded by files and financial statements, I realized just how far I had come. I was in the driver's seat now. The company that had once been his was now mine, and I had the power to make it work, or let it fail. The decision was mine, and for the first time in years, I felt a sense of freedom. I was no longer at the mercy of his mistakes or his expectations. I was in control, and that control gave me a new strength I had never known. But as the weeks passed, I began to see the changes not just in the business, but in myself. The once overwhelming sense of doubt and uncertainty began to fade. I had taken on the responsibility of the business, and while it wasn't easy, I found a rhythm. I restructured, reassessed, and began making the hard decisions that would turn the company around. Slowly but surely, things started to improve. My husband, on the other hand, became more distant. He didn't come to the office as often, and when he did, his presence was a shadow of what it had been before. I had taken over what he had once claimed as his empire, and I think that realization hit him harder than I could have imagined. There was no longer any partnership between us, only a constant struggle for control that neither of us was willing to give up. One afternoon, he came to the office, his face tight with frustration. "You don't get it," he said, his voice low but angry. "This was always supposed to be mine. I built it. You can't just come in and take it from me." I looked at him, feeling no anger, no desire to fight. "I didn't take anything from you," I said calmly. "I just stopped letting you take everything from me. The business wasn't just yours. It was ours. And now it's mine. You didn't build it on your own, and you didn't keep it running on your own. I helped too. I just never got credit for it." His eyes flickered with something, regret, perhaps, or resentment. I couldn't tell. But in that moment, I knew that I had won. Not because I had taken something from him, but because I had finally stepped into my own power. I was no longer the woman who lived in his shadow, who accepted whatever scraps he threw my way. I had built something of my own, and no one could take that from me. The business continued to grow, slowly but surely. There were still challenges, still moments of doubt, but I handled them in ways I never would have imagined a few months ago. I was no longer just surviving. I was thriving. But the real change, the true victory, wasn't in the business's success. It was in me. I had gone from being a woman who lived in constant fear of my husband's disappointment to a woman who took control of her own life. I had learned to trust myself, to stand up for my own needs and desires, and to stop letting someone else's failures define my future. In the end, the business wasn't the most important thing I had gained. It was my own sense of strength, my own independence. The woman I had become was no longer someone defined by the roles others expected her to play. I had learned that the most powerful thing I could do was take ownership of my own life. I stood in the conference room one last time, looking out the window at the city below, and for the first time in a long time, I felt at peace. The future was uncertain, but for the first time, it was mine to shape. And that thought, that quiet realization, was all the resolution I needed. As I looked out over the skyline, I knew one thing for certain. This was just the beginning. The world was full of possibilities, and this time, I was going to make sure I was the one in control. The future, for once, was no longer about what others expected from me. It was about what I could create for myself. And with that, a new chapter began.